pretty much any RPG you care to name, at least any RPG worth the name. Although today we are going to be focusing on Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and particular little passage contained here in the Player's Handbook about how to use mass combat, mass battle in your tabletop RPGs. It's easier than you've been led to believe. In our last video, we talked about your friend, the ratio. This is not social media. This is tabletop gaming. Ratios are your friend, and you want to use them because they allow you to scale the conflict while maintaining a consistent level of cognitive load. They allow you to treat this block of 120, remember we're using our 10-to-1 ratio, 10 spearmen for one figure. These 120 guys are no more complicated than this one PC, Sir Doodley. Likewise, these 60 rat spearmen are no more complicated than our rat assassin general, 4 hit die were-rat, whatever the case may be. We like ratios. The next concept that we really need to talk about is the concept of process-driven gaming versus outcome-driven gaming. And Gary Gygax nailed this because he came from the wargaming tradition, and he was able to distill the the results-driven gaming down to the process-driven gaming. And just as a quick introduction, process-driven gaming is what you are used to with modern-day skirmish combats as you see in typical RPGs. Basically, everything from 2nd edition on up, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and probably D&D 1 are going to be process-driven. Before we get into exactly what that means, let's talk about why you might want to do mass battles. The very simple, the easy thing that leaps to mind for everyone is that the more guys you have on the table, the more lives are at stake. The more is at stake, the more dramatic the situation becomes. There is something dramatic about watching Frodo and friends fight a cave troll and his handlers. But there's something even more over the top watching Helm's Deep stand, watching the Ride of the Rohirrim, 30,000 cavalrymen charging down the hill towards 10,000 orcs. That is impressive, and that's the kind of scale that we should be building to in our games, if you're not already starting there, which is a legitimate thing to do. But there's something else I want you to be aware of. When it comes time for Sir Doodley here to raise himself an army, he got a fat horde, he took a dragon out, and now he's got more money than he knows what to do with. Fortunately, he knows that what you do is you buy an army, and you take the battle to the enemy. He has marched his army into the Rat King's lair. Sir Doodley now has more responsibilities because he has, and just on this table alone, we see he's got 188 soldiers that he has to take care of. These units are not just a power that he can use in the game, they are also a liability. Sir Doodley now has to worry about how to keep these guys fed, how to keep them armed, how to keep them confident in their ability to effect whatever changes in the world Sir Doodley wants to effect. Do these guys really think that they can take on the Rat King in his own homelands? If they don't, that could be a problem. He needs to buck up their morale. So on the one hand, yes, these guys represent more power, but as we all know, because we all run in the same circles, with great power comes great responsibility. And if you are a DM who wants to give your PCs more responsibility, this is a wonderful way to do it. And when you take on responsibilities, you open the door for further adventures. So with that out of the way, the next question becomes, if you are building your armed forces organically through tabletop role-playing game play, the next question becomes, well, at what point do I want to start using this outcome-driven process? And there's no firm answer. That's a question like asking, how big is big? Well, how many is many? Depends on what you're comfortable with. Let's go with a visual representation. Our buddy Sir Doodley here has managed to scrape together an ally that the king has sent. Hey, listen, I'm going to give you 20 spearmen and 10 bowmen. Or maybe it's just, we're one-on-one. We're at 3 bowmen and he's got 6 spearmen to call his own. And maybe that's a reasonable number for you. One NPC, he's got 10 guys. That's not too bad. But if you start getting up into the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, that's when you really want to start incorporating. Here's 40, 50, and now 60 bowmen that you're handling with the roll of just 6 dice instead of 60. So I would argue that you really want to go with probably once you start getting up into the dozens, multiple dozens is when you want to start incorporating these. But the other question is, well, okay, well, how many can we handle? And the answer to that is, again, well, how big is big? And it depends on exactly, and we're going to answer that question in great detail later. But for now, just be aware that the system can start to break down. Whichever system you're using, there is a scale, an optimum scale at which it operates. And if you move beyond that scale, you wouldn't want to use ratios for less than 20 guys. And you probably wouldn't want to use the 10-to-1 ratio for more than about 1,000, 2,000 maybe. Fortunately, if you're playing the granddaddy of them all, remember Gary Gygax solved all these problems right out of the gate, 1978. This is really driven from more company level. Once you get up into the 1,000, 2,000, it can start to break down. The good news is ratios scale fairly well. So if we get to the point that we've got 240 spearmen, hey, great, these guys just represent 20 instead of 10. The real issue is that when you go, the wider you get between your 1-to-1 scale and for your heroes, and your 20, 30, 40, 100-to-1, the role of the heroes becomes diminished to the point that you might not want to incorporate this in your role-playing game. My hero is only worth 10 of these guys, I can dig it. 10-to-1, that makes sense. But now if he only has the power of about 100 of these guys, if this guy is worth 100, now there's no contest. Or even 1,000, if our figure represents 1,000, he's inconsequential, which is not where you want to be if you are running PCs in your tabletop game. So the answer is, it's up to you. But let's look at a couple of situations that will help you decide, is it time to move to the ratio? Is it time to move to mass combat, or can I handle this? And really, it all boils down to how complicated are things. I have set up a very simple situation where Sir Doodley is commanding 120 and 60. Very easy. Well, what if he has 62? And that's where we need to pause. 62 archers, that is. And that's where we need to pause and say, all right, hold on. Let's talk about the difference between process versus outcome. In your typical role-playing game, particularly modern iterations of Dungeons and Dragons, you are far more concerned about the process by which our were-rat assassin and Sir Doodley are in combat. We use 6-second combat rounds because I want to know what the process of that combat is. I've only got one guy to track, so he swings his sword at the were-rat, and maybe he hits and maybe he misses. And if he misses, maybe the were-rat is able to get around behind him, and the were-rat makes an attack, and he makes a 5-foot step away so that he doesn't have to worry, he doesn't have to show his back to the were-rat. We are handling this in very discrete, momentary, just snapshots, and every single shift of the feet almost is accounted for. We roll the dice, and then we decide what our mice do. We have rules for such things as dropped weapons, or called shots, or backstabs. Very discrete moments in time that track with our individual level. And that may be fine for what you're doing if you've got 5 people on a side. How far can he move in that 6 seconds becomes very pertinent. That is the process. We are specifically looking at the process by which these two figures fight out a duel. That is a skirmish level of gaming. When you step back and you focus on the mass battle figures, now we're dealing with the outcome. And now the question becomes, how do these 60 archers behave? I don't care if 2 of the archers in this in this unit have a cold that day, or one of them, sprained his ankle and so he walks a little bit slower. I am no longer looking at that scale for these figures. All I want to know is what will be the outcome if these guys shoot at the rats. I've got 60 shafts of arrows in the sky, and how do they land, and what effect do they have on these rats? I will roll 6 dice and see if I hit. And again, we're still using D&D, so our 60 0-level archers are going to hit. They're going to be rolling and hitting on a 15 or better. That means about a quarter of them will hit. Okay, well, that's 1.5. Let's call it 2. And that means they will take out 2 of these rats. Now, again, the process by which those 2 rats are fallen. Is it 1 rat here and 2 in the back row? Did 1 catch an arrow on his shield? How many took an arrow to the knee? How many got scared because it was raining arrows down and they ran away? It doesn't matter. That process is beneath the scale of our focus. What matters is the outcome. And so when you stop to say, is it time for me to shift my focus from the individual scale, like so, to the mass battle scale, at that point you have to ask, well, what is the outcome that I am looking for? And not specifically, well, who's going to win? That's not the outcome I'm talking about. I'm talking about the outcome of these 6 spear rats have charged in to combat with a unit that is twice their number. What is the process by which these suicidal rats go diving in? Well, hey, maybe these rats, they're ratlings. Maybe they're 2 hit dice. So you have 12 hit dice versus 12 hit dice. It's not a problem. Maybe you have to ask the question, would these 6 1-hit die rats really have the courage to charge these guys? That is now we're talking about outcome. Would they really move in? Maybe, given in order to charge a unit twice their size, you have to make a morale check. And then that morale check, that's the question of not the process by which they move into combat, but the outcome. And so you as a DM have to think about, well, what are the potential outcomes for this battle? What are the odds that outcome X happens versus outcome Y? And what sort of influences can the player's behavior do to affect the probabilities of X and Y? We're sliding dangerously close to Rule 0 here. What do you think is most likely to happen? And what are the rules that you use to check to see if that likely outcome occurs, or if you have that wild card show up? That is the process of the outcome-driven gaming. And that's what we do when it comes to miniature wargaming. We're not dealing with the fine mechanics of whether these spears are longer than these. Well, that guy's a little different. Let's look at this one instead. We now have 2 spears here, and this spear is longer. Perhaps this spear allows you to fight in 2 ranks. Okay. The outcome will be that I can have my guys stand back to back. They have a smaller frontage for a greater number of attacks. Perhaps the reason that these ratlings are confident moving into battle is that they are 2 hit die creatures, and with their shorter spears and their shorter little stumpy legs and arms, they realize that they're going to have to stand 1 abreast. Now, they're only going to get half as many hits, and so what we've decided now is we've said, what are the outcome? I think this is a fair fight. Well, how do I ensure that the fight is fair? Well, for starters, the humans are going to get twice as many attacks. On the other hand, the rat figures can withstand twice as many attacks. So we have to now roll 12 weak attacks to see how many of these figures we eliminate. Likewise, if they eliminate any figures, every single casualty will degrade the ability of the ratlings to affect their enemy much greater than losing a single figure on the part of the humans. Who's to say how this comes out? I don't know. It looks like a fair fight, but we're going to have to roll a lot of dice to find out. That is where we're more concerned with the outcome. And then you have the issue of, well, how many losses can each side take? The humans, perhaps, because they have Sir Doodley here, are at their front, and he's doing really well against his enemy. Perhaps there's a lot of other units around that have their back. They feel safe. They feel comfortable. They have a better morale. They could lose half their number. And there's a very good chance they will continue to fight. We're just losing 2 of these ratlings. Our rats are mercenaries, and they say, you know what? Dead men don't get paid. I am going to boogie on out of here as fast as my little rat legs will carry me. Again, we're looking at outcome, not process. So that's the mindset shift that you have to make, is that we're not concerned about the nitty-gritty fine details. We're really just concerned with the outcomes. This next process will probably be a lot easier to understand if we use an example. Through the course of our tabletop role-playing game play, we're playing a typical story game like 5th edition D&D, and we have done some role-play, and the local lord has gifted Sir Doodley or assigned him a task, and he has given him, now I'm going to use a ratio for this example of one figure represents 3 guys. That means our local lord has said, look, I got 36 men-at-arms, and I've got 18 bowmen that I'm going to give you. I want you to go out into the wilds, and I need you to patrol. And so Sir Doodley goes out to patrol with his guys. The easiest way to separate these guys would be, say, you know what? Let's just use one unit of 6 and one unit of 12. Very easy. It's 3 to 1. These guys each have 3 hit dice. These figures each have 3 hit dice. And maybe our 6th level fighter here has 6 hit dice, right? So now we have to maintain our consistent scale. We run into a ratling. This ratling represents 3 rats now, because there's lots more on the battlefield. And every hit that the ratling, as we discussed last time, every hit that the ratling does when we roll damage, it's going to count as 3 hits. And again, we're not worried about process versus, we're worried more about outcome. And that's where this falls into play, when we mix scales. I've got 3 regular rats attacking my guy. Either they all hit or they all miss, because I'm using that 3 to 1 ratio. Every time they hit him, we have to multiply the damage roll by 3. On the other hand, every time he hits these guys, he needs to do a minimum of 3 hit dice worth of damage, or even just 3 hit points in this case, in order to eliminate this one figure. Obviously, this figure will be able to do a lot more damage to Sir Doodley, and it will have more staying power, which is probably about right. Although this one figure has less staying power because we've assumed each of the rats kind of encapsulated in that figure has 1 hit, whereas if we had 3 guys, we would be able to do some flanking for our process. That may be part of why we tripled damage. Oh, maybe this guy hits and these other 2 miss, but because he's been able to get around behind, he does triple damage, so the effect is largely the same. Also, if these are individual creatures, they'll have a lot more hit points. These simplifying assumptions are really concerned more with outcome. They'll do more damage, it'll take more to kill them, but it just simplifies everything. And there's some advantages for both of these guys. But for today, the thing that I want to key in on is the fact that you don't have to, that because we're worried about the outcome, we can mix and match to our heart's content, provided we are constantly thinking about the outcome. I'm going to say, look, I want to break my forces up, and I'm going to use a 9 to 1 ratio now. So here's a unit that has 6 spearmen and 3 bowmen, and I've broken them up like this. Sir Doodley now has 2 units that he can call on that have, well, in a normal game, this unit would be able to fire 3 bow shots. But I have rolled all of these figures, these 9 to 1, into this one figure. And I've done the same thing over here. What would be 9 guys, I'm only going to use this one figure to represent them. The problem here is that we are not representing our bows, are we? But maybe that's not a problem. Maybe what we do is we assign these guys the ability to do shooting damage. But that shooting damage is very weak, right? Because we want each of our figures to be able to have some distance attacks, and we say, all right, well, they're not going to be as strong as if we had a unit of 9 bowmen. So 9 bowmen will be rolling standard dice. These guys, perhaps, they're a lot less likely to hit. I've only got 3 guys shooting instead of 9. That means I'm going to take a penalty on my hit roll. Not only that, but when they hit, they're only going to do 1/3 as much damage because there's 1/3 as many guys. So you can do that. However, bear in mind that you're using these guys in the way that no general would. Just generally speaking, if you'll forgive the pun. Sir Doodley is going to give these guys an order, and that order is likely going to be close with the enemy, hold this ground, take a shot. Why would he give these guys the order to take a shot when they have considerably less firepower than this unit, which has 9 archers? So what you'll find that happens in the tabletop game when you shift from the role-playing game to the mass battle is that you will not segregate your figures based upon what maximizing their utility, you will group them according to the orders you're likely to give them. I want a unit that I can trust to handle my long-distance attacks. I have a unit of bowmen. I am going to be far more comfortable as Sir Doodley giving this unit of 60 archers, you'll have to forgive the parrots, of giving these, I know how these guys are going to behave. There's a lot less randomness. They're not going to be as effective at melee, but they can shoot at a distance. So you guys all hang back while these guys run forward and engage with the enemy. You guys find a defendable position. So the answer is, when you combine your forces, do it in a way that makes sense for the outcome, not the process. If your outcome is going to be, I want to order my spearmen forward, I want to order my bowmen to hang back, then you lump them as much as possible. What if I have 38 bowmen? Well, you know what? Let's just go ahead and round up. What is the outcome? They're going to have the same battlefield effect. These 4 bowmen will have the battlefield effect equivalent to about 40 guys. If I have 42 bowmen, maybe I only use 40 figures. There's 1 or 2 left on either side. That's fine, provided that you use the same simplifying assumptions on both sides of the ledger. If I have 32 rat things, then I'll use 3 rat creatures. Use your standard. If it's 5 or higher, round up. Oh, I got 38 rat guys? All right, I got a 4th one there. Whether it's 36, 37, 38, 39, it will have the same effect as if there were 40. It's all right. Provided that you don't say, well, I'm going to always drop fractions for my humans and always round up for my rats, it all evens out in the end. The outcome will not be significantly affected by rounding up or down, provided you do it the same on both sides of the ledger. You may also find yourself in a situation where, and let me grab a couple more of these guys. And so what you may wind up having to do is, well, I've got a unit of 3. There's 5 spearmen, and I've got like 3 heavy hitters. Here's our 3 heavy hitters, and I want to combine these into a single unit. All right, well, I've clearly got more spears than armored guys. So even though I've got 8 guys here, I'm going to combine them into one unit, and now I have to ask the question, well, how does that unit behave? What is the outcome of their influence on the battle? Will the figure, I'm going to turn all of these 8 guys into one figure. Will that figure behave on the battlefield as a lightly armed spearman, or will he behave as a heavily armed, slow armored tank? I can't answer that question for you. That may be the question that Sir Doodley has to ask. How do I want these guys to be handled? They have different battlefield roles, different strengths and weaknesses. He may decide, well, you know what, since the majority of my guys are spearmen, I'm going to use a spearman. That's how they behave. Even though these 3 guys are losing their heavy armor, if you will, they have gained the spear and can now attack in 2 ranks. So I guess we could probably add 2 more spearmen to this just to make it clear. So we now have 10 figures, 7 spears, 3 heavy armor guys. How do they behave? Well, mostly they behave as these guys, so I'm just going to use this guy. Even if we had a couple of bowmen in there, let's stick him in there. See, I got 2 bowmen, I got 3 of these guys, and I got 7 spearmen. Wait a minute. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. All right, we're going to get rid of him. I got 2 bows, I got 2 heavy guys, and I got 6 spearmen. How do they behave? Well, 6 spearmen. I'm having a hard time counting today, guys. This is what happens when you do these things extemporaneously I'm operating without a net here, guys. Operating without a script. The only way to fly, I am an effective DM. That's how we roll. So the point being, these 10 guys can behave however you want, but be aware that you're better off grouping like with like. Use the majority rule if necessary, and if you just can't bring yourself to do that, pick a role, and that's the role they fulfill in this battle. You're interested in the outcome, not so much the process. And if you adopt that mindset, then suddenly you can have Sir Doodley, lone hero, adopt a whole bunch of orphans, whole bunch of, Uncle Sam's misguided children types. Here's our black company. And not only did these guys give Sir Doodley a lot more punching power within the campaign, They are a liability that complicate his life dramatically. And maybe you don't want his life complicated. Maybe you like your role-playing games simple. That's what 5th edition is for. But if you want to take your gaming to a new level, this is not for everybody, but it's probably for you. If you're here and you're watching this video on how to get good at role-playing games, this is one way to do it. Incorporate large-scale events into your campaign. Now, the last thing we need to talk about is how big is too big? And the answer to that, I think we discussed a little bit, that once the ratio between our PCs and our soldier figures gets to be too high, 10 to 1, 20 to 1, you're still operating within the bounds of reason. When you get to the point that you've got 100 or 200 dudes above, 10,000 on a side, the system does start to break down, and you'll have to look for a new system to use that has different simplifying assumptions. In miniature war games, we tend to discuss different rule sets and what is the maneuver element. Is the maneuver element one guy? That's a skirmish game. Is our maneuver element, here's 5 guys, this is a squad. Oh, so we've got a squad of guys. We're still at 1-to-1 with these guys. Squad-based, the maneuver element is a squad. Clearly, these 5 could be one figure. The 20 could be one figure. Each of these figures, at 20 guys, that's about a platoon, I would say. Each of these guys is a platoon. And then when you factor in your 100 guys, we're looking at what's the next? I'm not a military guy. What's the next step up? Company level, basically company level, where your maneuver element is the company. That's about the maximum size these can handle. Now, you may want to play a game that has armies of 10, 50, 100,000 apiece. But for most Dungeons and Dragons, when you're talking about the post-apocalyptic setting, when you're talking about Baron versus Baron rather than Empire against Empire, when you're out there on the borderlands and you've got a keep with several hundred guys in it, that's the scale of things. And even for games like Adventure Conqueror King, Adventure Conqueror King is a very interesting toolkit, I guess you could say, because Alexander Macros, he offers you a number of different tools that you can use, and you just shift which tool you're using as you dial that scale up further and further. But one thing to keep in mind, just real briefly, that ultimately there's a limit to how much you can control on the tabletop. And the more complicated the rules are for a single maneuver element, 10th level NPC should have that's about what one guy can handle. When you're dealing with mass combat games, you may be able to handle as many as, 5 to 10 maneuver elements. We'll break these guys out into about 5 of those. And there's the other issue then. So we've got our heavy hitters, we've got our bows, and we've got 2 units of spears. So this gives us 5 maneuver elements. And if these individual maneuver elements are overly complicated, then we'll struggle. The more maneuver elements you have, each element needs to be simplified more and more and more. Instead of having to worry about all 6, so for each of these units, we don't worry about strength, intelligence, dexterity, wisdom, constitution, charisma. We do that for this unit because he's special. But for these guys, we're really not interested. We're interested in, and this is the way Dungeons and Dragons breaks it down, just tell me the armor class, the bonus to hit, the weapon reach, damage, and maybe 1 or 2 things. That's all I can handle. And the more individual units you have, the more you need to simplify. You may want to bring these 2 together. Now I've got 4 units. I can handle a more complex operational set for this unit than I could with these guys. I have more status to track. I have more locations, more potential strategies. When we combine these guys into 1 unit, all of that stuff is cut by half. I only have to worry about the status of 1 unit. So that's another kind of axis to worry about on your complexity level. How many of these can you handle? What does each of these represent? It seems a lot more complicated than it really is. You have all of the basic tools in your standard role-playing game rule set for combat. The only real things you need to worry about are exactly what ratio am I going to use? Exactly what outcome do I think is likely? What are the probabilities that are inherent, and what are the factors that the players can use to influence those probabilities. My guy is standing up higher. He's going to fight better, for example. These rats don't like fighting in the daylight. Can I fight in the daylight to give them a penalty? These are the same questions you talk about around the table. They're the same factors that influence skirmish war games. All you do is use the 10-to-1, and now you've got a greater responsibility, and you've opened up further paths for adventure and exploration and excitement at your table. Add mass combat to your tabletop role-playing game. It just simply makes the game a better experience for everyone involved. Hopefully with these couple of videos, these 3 videos now, we have given you the tools you need to go forth and do likewise. I want you guys gaming at the highest level possible. This is it right here. This is one element you can include in your tabletop games that will keep them fresh, that will keep them exciting, and will keep your players coming back to the table begging for more. Until next time, I'm praying for you.